We're on to book number 11 today, and this is the first book of Kings, for it seems there is more than one book of Kings. I gather the book is written anonymously, but Jewish tradition holds that it was possibly written by a chap called Jeremiah, who it sounds like maybe a prophet. He doesn't appear in this first section, but presumably we will encounter him at some point. Today anyway, we are doing chapters 1 to 3, and this opens with David, King David, now being a very old man. It talks about he's struggling to stay warm. Because this is the days before electric blankets were invented, they decide that the solution to keeping David warm is they'll go and get a hot virgin to come and cuddle up to him and keep him warm. Clever, like it. But we do encounter another great biblical name, for her name is Abishag. Yep. Abishag, anyway, is a Shunammite. Not heard of them before, I don't think, but not sure. We also then have the introduction of another one of David's sons called Adonijah. Maybe a soft J, Adonijah, don't know. I'm going to go with Adonijah. And this guy, anyway, decides the king's really old. I'm going to make myself king. He's my dad, so fine. It seems like he takes steps to actually make this happen, but not everyone agrees that he should be king. Not least Nathan the prophet decides that, no, I don't think that's quite right. There's a big old conversation, big old hoo-ha, quite a long section. And anyway, David rules that no, Adonijah is not to be king, Solomon is going to be king. It sort of feels like it's set up, or certainly in modern terms it would be, to be almost like a will they won't they civil war type situation. But actually in the end Adonijah backs down and Solomon decides no, I'm not going to kill you, it's all fine, and everything seems pretty groovy. David then goes to Solomon and does this big long speech, basically an expression of his wishes for how Adonijah, Solomon should rule, and just some wisdom passed on, that sort of thing. Included in that is David talking about his demise, and he phrases it as he's about to go the way of all things on the earth. And it's just an odd way of putting it, isn't it? I mean, I'm suspicious that there's something clever in that I'm missing, but I can't think what it is, so we'll just carry on. But that's it, and David then dies. Adonijah then makes the terrible mistake of coming to Solomon and saying, I would like Abishag, please, because I'd like her to be my wife. And, I mean, this seemed a little bit cheeky, maybe, but it turns out that Solomon is particularly annoyed at this, annoyed to such an extent, in fact, that he has his own brother killed. And then, for good measure, he has Joab killed as well. Joab being one who backed Adonijah for his fake kingness, but also was the one who stabbed Absalom when he was hanging from the tree by his hair. To be fair, Joab has had a tricky history in terms of allegiances, I think, so maybe there's some sort of thing in that. But yeah, anyway, Solomon goes and kills a few people and consolidates his reign, and he's made proper king. It mentions that Solomon then makes an allegiance with the Pharaoh in Egypt and marries his daughter. Oddly, I feel the need to clarify there that when I say Solomon marries his daughter, he's marrying the Pharaoh's daughter, because it's the Bible, and you couldn't quite put it past people marrying their own daughters, could you? But no, Solomon marries the daughter of the Pharaoh of Egypt, and seems like everything's quite groovy there, maybe? God then appears to Solomon in a dream and basically says to him, what would you like from me? And Solomon has a good answer and comes back and says that he would basically like to be made wise in order to do a better job of doing his kingly duty. God, it turns out, is extremely pleased with this answer and decides to grant him not only the wisdom he's asking for, but also says he will have a particularly long life and he will make him rich. We then go straight into a short story which demonstrates the extent of Solomon's wisdom, in that we have two women, so we have Mother 1 and Mother 2. Mother 1's baby, has died in its sleep, and is accusing Mother 2 of having stolen... No, and Mother 2 accuses Mother 1 of having stolen her baby, to replace the dead one. And Solomon's cunning solution to this is he goes, I'm going to cut the baby in half. And then, of course, the real mother goes, no, don't worry. It's just let her have him. Just don't let the baby be hurt. And, of course, reveals who the real mother is, because apparently the other one didn't care when Solomon was going to do this. It's a bit odd, isn't it? I guess that sort of wisdom couldn't be applied in that sense in the modern context, but well, there we go. That's how wise Solomon is. In the short version, anyway, we have David dies, Solomon succeeds him, and Solomon becomes super wise, as almost like superpower wise, even though that scenario didn't seem that clever. I don't know. Maybe I'm cynical. So in terms of the interesting points to pull out of that, Solomon making his selfless wish for wisdom so he could be a better king, God really liking that and then over rewarding it by giving him riches and all the rest of it. It's interesting how that sort of grates a little bit on real life, doesn't it? In terms of most of the people doing the dutiful stuff aren't wealthy. So the obvious example is nurses, for example. There's a lot to that, obviously. But it's interesting where the Bible normally is so harmonious with real life principles. In this case, it almost seems a little bit counter to it, maybe, not sure. The second interesting point, perhaps isn't even a point at all, but something about, it's like when these significant people, like when Moses died and when David dies, you think, well, God could stop that, but he doesn't, and everyone seems cool with that. So it does sort of suggest that there's nothing intrinsically wrong with death. And I guess that comes back to perhaps the Genesis point, that are we, from the human perspective, looking at it a little bit wrong in terms of very limited perspective on suffering and death. And it's difficult to, how could you possibly see it any other way, obviously. But it is interesting that, I guess, if King David, who knows there is a God because he's spoken to him, which is not fair at all, is it? He will have a very different perspective on that than the rest of us. So, yeah, I don't know. Interesting anyway. And then the third point, finally, is just once again this mention of God appears to Solomon, but he does it in a dream. I remember back in Exodus, God saying that he mostly appears to people in dreams and visions and that, but he speaks plainly to Moses so that he will know him and all the rest of it. So Moses is clearly still more special than David in that respect. No, not David. More special than Solomon. But it's annoying, isn't it? It's such an unreliable way to communicate. And it's, I don't know, if you go into work on Monday and someone comes in and says, I had a dream last night and God told me to do this, like, yeah. And you'd be mad to approach it any other way than with a little bit of measured scepticism, I think. But there we go. Anyway, yes, so that's the interesting start to the book of 1 Kings, and we shall move on and see what Solomon gets up to and see if we can find this Jeremiah chap.